The crisp morning air filled the lungs of the four hikers as they embarked on their adventure into the uncharted woods. Jake adjusted the straps of his hiking pack and smirked. "We've officially left the map behind. No trails, no signs, just us and nature." Ryan grinned, his confidence radiating as he led the group deeper into the forest. "About time we found something off the beaten path. I'm tired of tourist trails." Behind them, Sarah and Emily exchanged glances. Sarah had always been the curious one, eager to explore the unknown, while Emily was more reserved, preferring the comfort of familiar trails. "Are we sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. "No one's been out here for a reason, right? It's uncharted for a reason." "Come on, Emily," Sarah replied, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "This is why we're here, to see something no one else has." The group pressed on, their boots crunching over fallen leaves and uneven ground. The forest grew denser, the canopy above blocking out much of the sunlight. Shadows stretched and twisted around them, but the group paid them little mind. Hours passed, and the hikers found themselves in an area unlike anything they'd ever seen. Massive oak trees surrounded them, their gnarled roots stretching out like claws. Moss draped over everything, giving the landscape an otherworldly feel. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jake stopped abruptly, causing the others to nearly collide with him. "Whoa, what is that?" he asked, pointing ahead. The group stepped forward, their eyes widening as they took in the sight before them. A circular formation of ancient stones stood in a clearing, each one weathered and covered in strange, intricate carvings. The air seemed colder here, and an unnatural silence enveloped the area. "Looks like we found something," Ryan said, a grin spreading across his face. Emily's stomach churned as she stared at the stones. Something about the place felt wrong, as if they weren't supposed to be there. "We should go," she said firmly. "This isn't right." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "Relax, Emily. It's just some old rocks, probably some weird historical site." Sarah knelt beside one of the stones, running her fingers over the carvings. "These symbols, I've never seen anything like this before. They don't look like any language I know." Nearby, Ryan picked up an object partially buried in the dirt. It was an old leather-bound journal, its cover rotting and brittle. He opened it carefully, revealing yellowed pages filled with faded writing and crude sketches. "Looks like someone left us a story," Ryan said, flipping through the pages. His expression darkened as he read aloud. "A ritual performed to trap an ancient spirit, a wish granted in exchange for a sacrifice." "Stop," Emily snapped. "This isn't a joke. We need to leave." But her words fell on deaf ears as curiosity and greed began to take hold of the others. The air seemed heavier as Ryan read from the brittle pages of the journal. His voice was steady, but the content sent chills down Emily's spine. "The spirit resides within the stones," he recited. "It offers the desperate a single wish, fulfilled at a cost. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the faded text. "It's like something out of a fairy tale," she said, fascinated. "A spirit granting wishes? This is incredible." "Incredible?" Emily exclaimed, her voice rising. "It's terrifying. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Jake scoffed, crossing his arms. "Relax, Emily, it's just a story. Someone probably wrote it to scare people off, like an old campfire tale." "It doesn't feel like just a story," Emily replied, her voice trembling. She couldn't shake the oppressive feeling surrounding the stone circle. The symbols carved into the stones seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Ryan ignored her, flipping to another page. The journal was filled with detailed accounts of rituals, drawings of symbols, and cryptic warnings. One sketch depicted a figure kneeling before the stone circle, surrounded by shadowy forms. Sarah traced her fingers over the carvings on one of the stones. "Do you think it's real? I mean, could something like this actually work?" "Only one way to find out," Jake joked, stepping closer to the circle. "Don't," Emily shouted, grabbing his arm. "We shouldn't be here. We don't know what these stones are or what that journal is talking about. We need to leave." Jake pulled his arm away, rolling his eyes. "You're overreacting. It's just a creepy old ritual site. Nothing's going to happen." The group's argument grew heated. Emily's fear clashed with the others' curiosity, their voices echoing through the clearing. "I'm not sticking around to find out," Emily yelled, turning to leave. But as she took a step, Jake moved to stop her, accidentally brushing against Sarah. The shove was small, but it was enough to knock Sarah backward into the stone circle. Her body tensed midair as she crossed the invisible barrier. Time seemed to freeze. The moment her foot touched the moss-covered ground within the circle, Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. Her body began to distort, her form flickering like a reflection in water. "Sarah!" Ryan shouted, reaching out, but it was too late. She vanished, leaving behind only her screams, which seemed to echo endlessly from the stones. The sound was deafening, primal, and filled with unimaginable terror. Then the clearing fell silent. The 3 remaining hikers stood in stunned disbelief. The silence stretched until a deep, gravelly voice emerged, resonating from the stones. "Well," it said, the words dripping with malice, "who's next?" Emily stumbled backward, her eyes wide with horror. Ryan and Jake stood frozen, their faces pale. "What was that?" Jake whispered. The voice chuckled, low and menacing. "I can grant you whatever your heart desires. All you need to do is ask." The sinister voice hung in the air, its malice chilling the blood of the remaining hikers. Emily backed away, trembling. "We need to leave. Right now." "Leave?" Ryan snapped, his voice tinged with panic and anger. "Sarah's gone. We can't just walk away." "She's not gone," the voice interjected, its tone mocking. "She's with me now, but you, clever little mortals, have a chance to get what you truly desire. Just make a wish." Jake's brow furrowed as he turned toward the stones. "Is this some kind of demon?" His voice wavered, but beneath the fear was something else. Temptation. "Call me what you will," the spirit replied. "I have no interest in your labels, only your desires." "Don't listen to it," Emily screamed, her desperation mounting. "It's a trap. We saw what happened to Sarah. Do you really think it's going to give you anything without a price?" Ryan shot her a sharp look. "And what are we supposed to do? Walk away and pretend this didn't happen? We don't even know what it wants." Jake stepped closer to the circle, his hands clenched into fists. "If it can bring Sarah back, maybe we should at least—" Emily grabbed his arm, shaking her head furiously. "Don't even think about it. It doesn't care about us. It just wants to hurt us." "Not hurt," the voice corrected smoothly. "I exist to give. I only take what is offered. Your friend stumbled in uninvited, but the rest of you have a choice." Ryan's mind raced as he stared at the circle. The journal's words echoed in his thoughts. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the reward. He thought of everything he'd ever wanted, the power, the knowledge. "What if it's telling the truth?" he muttered, almost to himself. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious? Sarah screamed for her life and disappeared into thin air. How much more proof do you need that this thing is evil?" But her words did little to deter Jake and Ryan. The lure of the unknown, the promise of something extraordinary, was too strong. Jake stepped closer, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "If this thing can grant wishes, maybe we can fix everything. Maybe it's worth the risk." "Worth the risk?" Emily repeated, her voice breaking. "Are you even hearing yourself? This isn't a game. Sarah is gone. If you make a wish, you'll end up just like her." The argument escalated, their voices rising in the stillness of the forest. In the chaos, Jake turned toward the stones, his jaw clenched. "I wish for strength," he blurted out. The air grew cold as the symbols on the stones began to glow faintly. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the circle. "Strength," the voice repeated, so simple, so primal, granted. Jake gasped, his muscles tightening and expanding, veins pulsing beneath his skin. He flexed his arms in disbelief, feeling an overwhelming surge of power coursing through him. "Jake!" Emily cried. "What have you done?" Before she could stop him, Ryan stepped forward, his eyes alight with greed. "I want to be the smartest man alive." The spirit's laughter grew louder. "Ah, ambition. Intelligence beyond measure. Granted." Ryan staggered back as his mind filled with a flood of knowledge. Equations, languages, histories, endless streams of information surged through him, bringing him to his knees. Emily screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. "Stop it, please!" But Sarah's voice, soft, desperate, almost unrecognizable, called out from the circle. "Emily, it's okay. You can make a wish. It's safe." "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "You're lying." The remaining hiker, Sarah, stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she said, "I want eternal youth." The spirit cackled. "Vanity. The easiest sin of all, granted. Sarah's skin smoothed, her hair shimmered, and her posture straightened as if time had rewound itself. She touched her face, awe-stricken. The spirit's laughter echoed, a terrible sound filled with malice. Now enjoy the gifts you've earned, and remember, no wish comes without its price. Emily could only watch in horror as her friends, enthralled by their desires, left the circle, leaving her standing in the growing shadow of their greed. The hike back to camp was eerily silent. Emily trudged behind the others, her heart racing as dread seeped into every corner of her mind. She couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed, what her friends had done. Jake flexed his arms as he walked, marveling at the newfound strength coursing through his muscles. "I feel incredible," he said, grinning, "like I could lift a car or punch through a tree." Ryan, walking beside him, had a distant look in his eyes. His expression flickered between fascination and fear as he muttered to himself, running through complex equations and theories aloud. The speed of light isn't constant in some dimensions. If gravity collapses, wormholes might stabilize. His words were incomprehensible to the others, but the manic gleam in his eyes unsettled Emily. Sarah walked ahead of them, her posture impossibly perfect. Her skin glowed as though lit from within, and her every movement seemed unnaturally graceful. "This is everything I've ever wanted," she murmured, running her fingers over her smooth cheeks. "I'll never age, never fade. It's perfect." "It's wrong," Emily spat, her voice shaking. "You've seen what that thing can do. It's not giving you gifts, it's playing with you. You don't know what the price is." Jake scoffed, glancing back at her. "The price is that we're better now. Stronger, smarter, younger. Stop being so paranoid, Emily." She stopped walking, her fists clenched at her sides. Sarah screamed when she disappeared. "And now you're all acting like nothing's wrong. Can't you see that thing isn't giving, it's taking?" Ryan turned to her, his expression unnervingly calm. "Maybe we're just different now, Emily. Change is always uncomfortable for those who don't embrace it." His words sent a shiver down her spine. His tone wasn't Ryan's. It was cold, detached, as though he were already slipping away. By the time they returned to camp, night had fallen. The fire they'd built earlier was still smoldering, casting faint light over the darkened clearing. Emily sat by the fire, keeping her distance from the others as they celebrated their so-called gifts. Jake lifted a fallen tree trunk with ease, tossing it aside like it weighed nothing. "You see that? Super strength," he said, his grin wide. "I've always wanted this." Sarah admired her reflection in a small mirror she'd pulled from her pack. "I could live forever like this," she mused, her voice dreamy. "What's one little wish in exchange for eternity?" Ryan sat cross-legged, scrawling incomprehensible symbols into the dirt. His muttering grew louder, more frenetic. "We're all part of the same equation. Energy, mass, entropy, it's all just variables." Emily stared into the fire, her stomach knotting. She could feel it. This wasn't over. Whatever the spirit had done, whatever gifts it had granted, would come at a cost. And when that cost came due, she knew it wouldn't be something they could run from. As the fire crackled and the forest fell silent, Emily lay awake in her tent, dreading the dawn. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, and she knew that whatever was happening to her friends, it was only the beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came with the sunrise. Emily had barely slept, her mind replaying the events at the stone circle over and over. When she emerged from her tent, the forest felt heavier, the air thick and oppressive. The others were already awake, but something about them was off. Jake was the first to speak. "Morning," he said, his voice strained. His normally confident tone was replaced with a hint of unease. Emily's eyes widened as she took in his appearance. His muscles, once impressive but proportional, had grown grotesquely large. Veins bulged unnaturally across his arms and neck, his skin stretched taut over the rapid growth. He moved with a stiffness that suggested his newfound strength was no longer entirely under his control. "Jake, are you okay?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. He forced a grin, but it looked more like a grimace. "I'm fine, just adjusting, I guess." He reached for his pack, but his grip crushed the fabric, tearing it open. "Damn it!" he shouted, his frustration palpable. Meanwhile, Ryan sat by the fire, scribbling furiously into a notebook. The dirt around him was covered in more strange symbols and equations, all incomprehensible to Emily. His lips moved rapidly as he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting around as though following invisible lines of thought. "Ryan?" Emily called softly. He didn't respond. His hands moved faster, the notebook filling with page after page of dense writing. Sweat beaded on his forehead and his pupils were dilated. "I can see it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The structure of everything. Energy, matter, time. It's all connected. But it's too much. Too much." He clutched his head suddenly, groaning. "It won't stop. I can't turn it off." Emily's heart pounded as she turned to Sarah, who stood at the edge of the camp, staring at her reflection in a small stream. "Sarah?" Emily approached cautiously. Sarah didn't look up, her fingers tracing her face. Her skin, once smooth and glowing, now seemed unnaturally perfect like porcelain. But cracks had started to form along her hands and arms, faint at first but deepening as Emily drew closer. "I'm still beautiful," Sarah murmured, her voice hollow. "But something's wrong. It's like my body doesn't know what to do with itself anymore." As Emily watched in horror, a piece of Sarah's skin flaked off, crumbling into dust. "Oh my God, Sarah," Emily cried. Sarah turned to her, panic flashing in her eyes. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know it would—" A sudden scream from Jake interrupted her. He had accidentally crushed a metal water bottle in his hands, the jagged edges cutting into his palms. Blood dripped onto the ground, but he didn't seem to feel the pain. Ryan dropped his notebook, clutching his head as he let out a guttural cry. "It's too loud. Too many voices, too many equations. I can't make it stop." Emily backed away, her fear mounting. The forest around them seemed darker, the trees pressing in like silent witnesses to their torment. "We have to go back," Emily said, her voice firm despite the terror coursing through her. "We have to go back to the stones and undo this." The others didn't respond immediately, their agony consuming them, but as the realization set in that their wishes had become curses, they reluctantly agreed. Together they packed their things and began the trek back to the stone circle, the weight of their choices growing heavier with each step. The hike back to the stone circle was nothing short of a nightmare. The forest, once an adventure, now felt alive with malice. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf sent Emily's heart racing, but she didn't dare voice her fears. The others were too preoccupied with their unraveling conditions to notice the oppressive atmosphere closing in around them. Jake led the group, though his steps were clumsy and labored. His grotesquely swollen muscles now seemed to hinder him more than help. Every movement strained his body, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. "I can't keep this up," Jake muttered, stopping to lean against a tree. His hands left bloody smears on the bark, his grip unintentionally splintering the wood. Emily rushed to his side. "We're almost there," she lied, though the truth was far from comforting. "You have to keep moving." Ryan trailed behind, his notebook clutched tightly in his trembling hands. He scribbled furiously even as he walked, his muttering growing louder and more erratic. "Everything connects," he said, his voice unnervingly calm despite the madness in his eyes. "But the variables, they don't balance. It's all wrong. The cost is too high." Emily glanced back at him, her stomach twisting. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was slipping further away with each step, consumed by the knowledge that had once seemed like a gift. Sarah walked silently, her arms wrapped around herself. Her flawless skin continued to flake away, leaving raw, tender patches underneath. She refused to meet Emily's gaze, her once proud demeanor replaced by a hollow, haunted look. As the group pushed forward, the forest seemed to shift around them. Trails they'd once followed with ease now twisted and turned, leading them in circles. Emily swore the trees were closer than before, their gnarled branches reaching toward them like skeletal hands. "It's this place," she muttered under her breath. "It's like it doesn't want us to leave." They finally reached a clearing, but it wasn't the one they sought. A strange hush fell over the group as they looked around. The trees here were blackened and dead, their bark charred as though scorched by fire. The ground was covered in ash, and the air was suffocatingly still. "This isn't right," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We've been here before, haven't we?" "No," Ryan said, his eyes darting around. "This is different. This is wrong." A faint sound broke the silence, a distant echoing laugh that sent chills down Emily's spine. "Keep moving," she urged, forcing herself to stay calm. "The stones have to be close." But the group's progress was slow. Jake's strength continued to betray him, each step leaving deep imprints in the forest floor. Ryan's ramblings grew louder, his voice overlapping with itself, as though he were arguing with an unseen presence. "I didn't ask for this," Sarah cried suddenly, stopping in her tracks. She clawed at her arms, her nails scraping away the delicate flakes of her skin. "I wanted to stay young, not fall apart." "Sarah, stop!" Emily grabbed her hands, pulling them away from the damage she was inflicting on herself. "We're going to fix this. We just have to get back to the circle." "Fix this?" Jake said bitterly, his voice strained. "We don't even know if we can. What if it's already too late?" "It's not," Emily said firmly, though she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. "We just have to get there." As they pressed on, the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to grow heavier, the path ahead darker and more twisted. Emily could feel it now, something watching them, waiting for them to break. And deep down she feared they already had. The stone circle finally came into view, a sinister beacon in the dark forest. The carvings on the stones glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. The air grew colder with every step, and the oppressive silence deepened as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Jake stumbled into the clearing first, his knees buckling under the weight of his overgrown muscles. He fell to the ground, gasping for air. "We're here," he choked out. "Now what?" Ryan was next, muttering under his breath as he stared at the glowing stones. His notebook was clutched tightly in his hand, its pages filled with incomprehensible scrawls. "The variables," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're all wrong. But the solution? It's here. It has to be." Sarah walked slowly into the clearing, her once pristine appearance now a grotesque parody of beauty. Her skin flaked off in chunks, revealing raw, glistening flesh beneath. She avoided looking at the others, her arms wrapped tightly around her crumbling form. Emily was the last to enter, her steps hesitant. Her eyes darted around the clearing, searching for any sign of the spirit. The oppressive feeling of being watched was stronger now, the air thick with malice. The voice returned, low and mocking, resonating from the stones. "Ah, my dear visitors, back so soon?" Emily's fists clenched at her sides. "Fix this," she demanded. "Fix what you did to them." The spirit laughed, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the forest. "Fix it? But they got exactly what they wished for, strength, intelligence, eternal youth. It's not my fault they failed to consider the price." "It's killing them," Emily shouted. "You have to undo it." "Undo it?" the voice echoed, its tone dripping with false sympathy. "Why would I undo such delightful gifts? Unless, of course, you're willing to offer me something in return." Jake struggled to his feet, his face twisted in desperation. "What do you want?" The spirit's laughter grew louder. "Ah, now we're talking. It's simple, really. Step into the circle and all will be made right." "No," Emily shouted, stepping between Jake and the stones. "Don't listen to it. That's how it got Sarah." Ryan's eyes locked onto the glowing carvings, his mind racing. "The circle. It's the key. It's how it traps us." "Traps," the spirit repeated, feigning offense. "I simply fulfill desires. If your fragile forms can't handle the gifts, that's hardly my fault. But I can make it better. Step into the circle, and I'll take it all away." Jake staggered forward, desperation etched into his face. "I can't live like this," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I don't care what it takes." "Jake, no!" Emily screamed, grabbing his arm. But his strength was too much. He broke free, lurching toward the circle. Ryan followed without hesitation, his muttering now a frantic chant. "It's the only way to balance the equation." "Stop," Emily pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's lying to you." Sarah hesitated, her crumbling hands trembling. She looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to die like this," she whispered, before stepping forward. One by one they crossed the threshold of the circle. The moment their feet touched the mossy ground, their screams pierced the air. The stones glowed brighter, the carvings pulsating wildly as the spirit's laughter drowned out everything else. Emily watched in horror as her friends' forms twisted and contorted, their bodies dissolving into the same flickering distortion that had consumed Sarah before. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the clearing fell silent. The glowing stones dimmed, and Emily's heart sank as she realized her friends were gone. The voice returned, quieter now but no less menacing. "Your turn, my dear. What is it you desire?" Emily stood frozen, the weight of the spirit's words pressing down on her. The clearing was eerily silent now, the absence of her friend's screams more deafening than the sound itself. "I don't want anything from you," she spat, her voice trembling but defiant. The spirit chuckled, the sound low and rumbling like distant thunder. "Oh, but everyone wants something, my dear. Power, knowledge, beauty, love, even escape. You could wish to leave this forest unscathed, forget everything that's happened here." Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You think I'd trust anything you say after what you did to them?" "They made their choices," the voice replied smoothly. "And they paid the price. But you're different. I see it in you. You're cautious, clever. You've resisted temptation this far, but can you truly walk away with nothing?" Emily glanced at the stones, their carvings faintly glowing in the dim light. Her chest tightened as she thought about Jake, Ryan, and Sarah, how easily they'd been seduced by the spirit's promises. She wouldn't make the same mistake. "I don't need anything from you," she said firmly, though her voice quivered. "I just want to leave." "Leave?" The spirit's tone shifted, dripping with mockery. "And carry the weight of this forever? The guilt, the fear, the nightmares? I could take it all away, make you forget it ever happened." Emily's stomach churned. The thought was tempting, too tempting, but she shook her head. "I don't trust you." "Wise," the spirit admitted, its tone almost impressed. "But are you sure you can live with this, knowing what you've seen, knowing what you've done?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the spirit's words struck a nerve. She hadn't pushed Sarah into the circle, but she hadn't stopped her either. She hadn't forced Jake, Ryan, or Sarah to make their wishes, but she hadn't convinced them not to either. The guilt gnawed at her, but she knew better than to accept the spirit's offer. "I'll live with it," she said, her voice breaking, "as long as I'm free of you." The spirit laughed, a sound that seemed to echo endlessly in the clearing. "Ah, but freedom is never so simple. You may walk away now, but you'll carry this with you forever. The burden will be yours to bear, just as it has been for so many before you." Emily turned away from the circle, her legs trembling as she took a step toward the edge of the clearing. "And what of them?" the spirit called after her. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "They were your friends, weren't they?" the voice taunted. "Don't you want to save them? Or will you let them vanish into nothingness, forgotten and alone?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to keep walking. "They made their choices," she whispered, more to herself than to the spirit. As she stepped out of the clearing, the spirit's laughter followed her, echoing through the trees like a terrible melody. "You're strong, my dear," it called, "stronger than most. But there will always be others, foolish, greedy souls who seek what they cannot have. This place, it will never be empty for long." Emily didn't look back. Weeks later, Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the journal she'd brought back with her. She had debated leaving it behind, burying it in the forest with the rest of the nightmare, but something compelled her to keep it. The leather cover was brittle, the pages fragile beneath her fingertips. She'd read through it more times than she cared to admit, trying to understand the madness that had consumed her friends. The cryptic warnings and fragmented rituals offered little clarity, only deepening the mystery of the spirit and its insidious game. She reached for her phone and dialed the local ranger station. She had already reported her friends as missing, but she couldn't bring herself to explain what had really happened. What could she say? That a spirit in the woods had granted wishes that destroyed them, that they'd vanished into a glowing circle of stones? The authorities had conducted a search but found no trace of them. To the world, Jake, Ryan, and Sarah were just another group of hikers who had disappeared in the wilderness. Emily knew the truth. She closed the journal and shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut. She didn't want to think about the stones anymore, about the spirit's mocking voice, or the impossible choices it had forced upon them. But as she turned to leave, a faint sound stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't a voice or laughter. It was the unmistakable sound of a page turning. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly she turned back to the drawer. It was closed, but the sound came again. Turn the page, a familiar low voice whispered in her mind, sending chills racing down her spine. Emily backed away, her breath catching. The spirit's final words echoed in her memory. There will always be others. She fled the room, slamming the door behind her. The forest was still out there, waiting. The stones, the spirit, the trap. It would all remain, and someday someone else would find it. The journal disappeared from the drawer, its secrets waiting to be uncovered once again. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.